Good day. This is the third in the series of lectures regarding glucocorticoids. And this will be very useful for you when you get to the module on allergy and immunology because in this video lecture, we will be talking about the inhaled glucocorticoids, especially the intranasal or the nasal glucocorticoids. This is the outline of this short presentation. We'll talk about some of the indications for topical inhaled glucocorticoids and the determinants of pharmacokinetics. And towards the end, talk about the principles of therapeutics. You will learn when you get to the module on allergy and immunology that there are four major drug classes that are used for the treatment of allergic rhinitis. The first are, of course, the antihistamines or the H1 receptor blockers, of which there are two major subtypes, the first and the second generation antihistamines. And you probably already know that the second generation antihistamines are the non-sedating ones. The second are the nasal decongestants, which are typically alpha adrenergic agonists. And if you've ever had clogged nose, you know how important nasal decongestants are to your quality of life. And what we have in our market are the following formulations. We have oxymetazoline nasal spray. We have saline spray or saline solution. And we also have phenylephrine, which is typically combined with paracetamol in many of the over-the-counter formulations. Then, of course, we have the nasal glucocorticoids or corticosteroids. And number four are the leukotriene receptor agonists, foremost of which is Montelukast. We will talk about Montelukast again when we get to the pulmonary module. Now, the nasal inhaled glucocorticoids are very important because they address many of the signs and symptoms, no? The manifestations of rhinitis. So they're very versatile in the treatment of rhinitis. So it will address the sneezing and the itchiness, the rhinorrhea or the runny nose, and it will also address congestion. No? Although the alpha adrenergic agonists are better decongestants. Now, the intranasal corticosteroids have very potent topical activity. You just administer low doses directly to the site of action, and that is the nasal mucosa, and they demonstrate considerable efficacy even at these low doses. A small part of the inhaled dose is actually swallowed and undergoes rapid first pass hepatic metabolism, much like any systemically absorbed drug. And because the swallow dose is typically very small, it will have negligible systemic activity. Comparing oral glucocorticoids versus inhaled glucocorticoids, there is typically markedly greater inhibition of allergic rhinitis with the inhaled steroids because of the action will be directly at the site versus the oral glucocorticoids, which will also manifest with more adverse drug reactions. So tracing the kinetics of the inhaled glucocorticoids, if you use a nasal inhaler, uh, most of it will be delivered into the nasal mucosa depending on how lipophilic the drug is, but there will always be a swallowed fraction. And it can be as much as more than 50% of the nominal dose. This swallowed dose, of course, goes to the GI tract. A part of it is absorbed from the gut and undergoes first pass metabolism and inactivation in the liver. So that the active drug from the gut that is absorbed into the systemic circulation is variable depending on the characteristics of the formulation. The greater is the lipophilicity of that drug, the less will be the systemic bioavailability. And the more common drugs are listed here, which we will talk about later. Now, of course, the one that is sprayed directly and which is absorbed in the nasal mucosa passes across the nasal mucous membrane, and still some part of it goes to the systemic circulation. Again, how much of it makes it to the systemic circulation will depend on how lipophilic the drug is. So, as small lipophilic molecules, the inhaled glucocorticoids probably enter the target cells by simple diffusion. And as I've already said, lipophilicity is preferred. Highly lipophilic substances show a higher and faster uptake by the nasal mucosa, and more importantly, greater retention within the tissue. This lipophilicity also leads to an enhanced glucocorticoid receptor binding. So if you list down the drugs, the preparations that are available, the one with the highest lipophilicity would be mometasone furoate, abbreviated as MF, which is nearly equivalent to fluticasone propionate. So they're almost equivalent, no? Followed by budesonide, beclometasone dipropionate or BDP, and then lastly, flunisolide. So if you just want to remember the most important concepts, MF and FP are equivalent, highest rank order in terms of lipophilicity, highest lipophilicity, and the least lipophilicity is flunisolide or FLU, and in between are the two Bs, budesonide and beclometasone dipropionate. This is shown again in this table that demonstrates to you that if you administer fluticasone or mometasone furoate intranasally, the amount that will be available or the percentage that will be available that will have systemic bioavailability is very small, less than 1%, as compared to flunisolide and the in-betweens, the two Bs, budesonide and beclometasone, as shown here. They have greater systemic bioavailability, meaning a little less is retained and a lot of it could make it into the systemic circulation. Likewise, shown on the right would be the systemic bioavailability when these drugs are taken orally. So your question might be, why do these drugs continue to exist, therefore, like flunisolide, when it has the lowest lipophilicity of the different formulations? The reason is because these drugs that have less lipophilicity could more than make up for that property by being more potent. And if you take a look at this approximate potency of the drugs, you will note that flunisolide actually has the highest potency, meaning if therefore you want it to be equivalent to fluticasone and mometasone, it's possible because it is 2 times as potent as compared to fluticasone and mometasone. Now, which do we prefer therefore? Do we prefer fluticasone or mometasone since they have approximately the same lipophilicity? In reality, for the nasal sprays, there are not much differences in terms of efficacy. So if you ask people who use them, in terms of the relief of symptoms of allergic rhinitis, they're much the same. However, what they could be different, no, is in terms of the adverse drug reactions due to the relative lack of specificity of mometasone to the glucocorticoid receptor. So they have done cell-based functional systems. They've used it to measure the different aspects of glucocorticoid receptor function, as well as the activity of these drugs at all the other steroid nuclear receptors. And what they have seen is that mometasone furoate has considerably less specificity for the GR than fluticasone propionate, showing significant activity at other nuclear steroid receptors. So again, the concept of receptor crosstalk. So if you take a look at their effects, no, on the glucocorticoid receptor, they both have potent effects. The two cannot be distinguished, and so in terms of efficacy, they're much the same. For the estrogen receptor, there's no activity for both. For the androgen receptor, both were weak antagonists, but it was with the progesterone receptor and the mineralocorticoid receptor for which there are some differences. So for the progesterone receptor, the mometasone was a very potent agonist of the progesterone receptor, but at concentrations that are similar to those that stimulate the glucocorticoid receptor. Meaning, if you give mometasone at doses that are able to bind to the glucocorticoid receptor, it will also bind to the progesterone receptor and exert potent agonistic activity. While for the mineralocorticoid receptor, fluticasone was a weak antagonist, while mometasone again displayed potent partial agonist activity. And so what does that mean? No? The ADRs reported to be associated with inhaled glucocorticoid use result from systemic exposure to the steroid despite the topical administration. Both of them have been developed to have pharmacokinetic profiles that should minimize ADR, so greater nasal mucosal retention, or if you want for the lungs in asthma, better lung retention with rapid metabolism. But despite extensive drug development efforts, there's still some evidence of systemic exposure. So therefore, if systemic exposure is sufficient to generate effects mediated through the glucocorticoid receptor, that is, for example, suppression of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, it's highly likely that with mometasone furoate, the progesterone receptor will also be activated, while with fluticasone it would not be. And inappropriate activation of the progesterone receptor could result in dysregulation of the estrous cycle or the menstrual cycle, which may be more evident or severe in women with pre-existing difficulties. Excessive activation of the progesterone receptors could ultimately have some sort of a contraceptive effect. A similar argument can be made for the effects on the mineralocorticoid receptor, where fluticasone acted as an antagonist with low potency, while mometasone behaved as a classical partial agonist with the potency at the mineralocorticoid receptor more than 10 times higher than fluticasone. And while these concentrations are a little higher than those which stimulate the glucocorticoid receptor, even small effects on the mineralocorticoid receptor may lead to disturbances of the homeostatic mechanisms regulating electrolyte balance that could result in clinical manifestations following long-term corticosteroid use or during corticosteroid withdrawal. However, reality is often different, no, from what is theory. And in clinical trials of patients with allergic rhinitis, it was shown that clinical efficacy and tolerability were very similar for different corticosteroid nasal sprays. However, patients with allergic rhinitis preferred fluticasone versus mometasone overall based on a number of individual attributes, including the less drip down the throat, less run out of the nose, and less irritating. So if you've ever used a nasal spray, sometimes after you spray it, you actually taste the product, no, the drug. And to some people, that can actually discourage them from using the drug. And so greater preference may improve adherence and therefore generally improve symptom management of the allergic rhinitis. When we get to the module on respiratory pathology, we'll also talk about the pharmacokinetics of the inhaled pulmonary corticosteroids, where the kinetics are very similar. If you use a metered dose inhaler, an MDI, which is probably the most commonly available inhaler, if you apply it, you puff it in front of your mouth, only around 10 to 20% is actually inhaled, and the greater proportion would be swallowed. And by using a spacer, you will be able to actually improve the efficiency of the inhaler and have more of it inhaled rather than swallowed. And so this swallow dose again will undergo inactivation in the liver through the first pass metabolism, and the systemic effects will be very minimal, especially at the lower doses. So these are some examples of the available inhaled respiratory glucocorticoids. It's much the same as the inhaled nasal glucocorticoids. Again, fluticasone, and then the Bs, budesonide and beclometasone. And in the past, we also had triamcinolone, as well as also mometasone. Now again, the pulmonary bioavailability of the inhaled corticosteroid is the rate and extent that the drug reaches its site of action. So again, much like the nasal corticosteroids, you want high pulmonary bioavailability and low oral or systemic bioavailability. You want very little to reach the systemic circulation. You want more of it to be deposited into the respiratory system. And as a contrast to the inhaled nasal corticosteroid, of which there are very few differences in terms of the device that is used, for the inhaled respiratory corticosteroids, the oral bioavailability does not only depend on the lipophilicity, but also depends on the delivery device which is used or the inhaler that is used. So just to show you that, in this list of drugs, no, you can see that if you use meter dose inhalers, the pulmonary deposition is not a lot. But if you use the new generation meter dose inhalers or a turbohaler, which is a dry powder inhaler, the deposition is much better. No? If you use the meter dose inhaler that's pressurized and then you put a spacer, you're actually able to improve the pulmonary deposition. So superimpose this concept that the inhaler system, of course, determines the amount that is deposited and therefore the systemic bioavailability versus the inherent, again, lipophilicity of the drug. And that's again manifested by their binding affinity, where mometasone as well as fluticasone have the best binding affinity, lower for the Bs, no, as shown here. But if you take a look at the amount that is delivered in the lung, it is probably because of the device that is used that beclometasone in this example has a higher lung delivery. So here again, that is shown. This is shown in this example. Again, remember that the highest lipophilicity is mometasone and fluticasone. Apparently, there is no mometasone inhaler, respiratory inhaler. What we have is fluticasone propionate. And we also have the same, the Bs, no, beclometasone and budesonide. And the least lipophilicity is flunisolide. But if you take a look at their actual lung deposition, the highest lung deposition is with beclometasone and flunisolide, and less for fluticasone in this example. And what's good is that fluticasone, even if the lung deposition is less, it has greater retention, no, because of its lipophilic properties. And so what we have in our market, actually, the three most common inhaled glucocorticoids are fluticasone, budesonide, and beclometasone. We don't have the rest, including this one. I think this is, well, I'm not sure what actually the CIC stands for, no, but we don't have it. So just to let you know then that if you're going to encounter tables like this when you start studying asthma in the pulmonary module, and you will realize that we are actually able to make the different formulations equivalent to each other. This is a CIC, ciclesonide, no? We are able to make them equivalent to each other because despite differences in potency, difference in lipophilicity, because of the way that they're formulated. So for example, I said that fluticasone and mometasone has the highest lipophilicity. And so when you administer them at these doses or these doses in micrograms, they can be classified as low, medium, and high dose. Now, on the other hand, uh, beclometasone, dipropionate, for example, or even budesonide, you can make it equivalent to fluticasone, furoate, or propionate because you can administer it at this double dose, and both will be classified as low dose inhaled glucocorticoid. So by changing the dose formulation, you are able to make them equivalent in terms of potency. So these are relatively more concentrated to approximate the potency of and efficacy of the agents like fluticasone and mometasone. Now, some of the other considerations for therapeutics, I'm winding up the lecture, is that consider that when you use the topical agents, their efficacy is delayed by around 1 to 2 weeks. And so if you want faster effects, we have to give oral or injectable systemic steroids during acute exacerbations of, let's say, for example, asthma, or you have an acute attack of your allergic rhinitis. You can give oral or systemic steroids temporarily while waiting for the effects of the inhaled glucocorticoids. Suitability is another consideration. This must be considered in terms of the device that will be used. So, for example, the meter dose inhalers are hard for children and the elderly to use because of the necessary coordination that's needed to ensure drug delivery. And finally, safety is an issue. While this is not such a big issue in low or medium dose inhaled glucocorticoids, when you use higher dose inhaled glucocorticoids, again, because of the discussion in terms of the loss of specificity of their action, when you use higher doses, and a greater proportion will now be swallowed and may lead to some systemic effects. And we will talk about that when we go to the pulmonary module, because in children, this might actually lead to some impairment of growth. So with that, I end the lecture. Thank you very much for your time and attention.